All right. Well, welcome back to the Pastors Podcast here on the Becoming Resources channel. And we are back today with another leadership slash lifestyle kind of leadership moment. So this one, I asked my dad to come on for. Give him a little bit of your background in work and all that kind of stuff.
I'm old,
Okay.
but old comes experience.
Yes.
So started out in the banking business. I talk a little fast sometimes if somebody said, "You're a baker? What do you bake?" I'm like, "No, it's
Nothing.
banking.
He bakes nothing.
I bake nothing." She's a baker.
No, my husband.
But banking. So back in college, I worked my way through and then got a business degree and then stayed in banking. So I was in banking for 13 years and went through the whole thing from starting out being a collector to consumer loans to commercial loans.
You were a teller too at one point.
I told a lot of people stuff.
Yes.
That's not what a
He
teller
still
does.
does.
A teller in a bank, yeah. So not very funny, but hey.
He's hilarious.
So, but walking through that, and then at that point, when got saved at 31 years old and jumped into full-time vocational ministry, numbers follow me around. So every place I've gone, from being executive pastor to senior pastor to a COO of a large nonprofit, really all the money has always been around me and been investments and budgeting and creating budgets and those kind of things. So pretty much I would say 30 plus years of experience in banking and in money.
Yeah, and so with that, he has actually taught. You've done the financial peace courses in like teaching like in small groups, and he's taught a lot on tithing. That was kind of his message before he became a senior pastor. I think people leaned on him to teach on tithing because he does a very good job of it. Because one thing that my dad does really well is he takes concepts that kind of seem out of reach. You sometimes you walk into a room and it's so messy you just don't know what to do, so you just walk out of the room. So finances and budgeting, sometimes people hear those words and they get scared and they're like, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing and not look at it. Well, he takes those concepts and he breaks it down and he's like, just pick the first thing up, and once you say it, it really turns a light bulb on. So I thought, even though some people watching this may, and you probably do, have your finances down, you guys have a lot of money and you guys know what you're doing, this is not only a way for you to be able to, just laugh at us and the silly things we say, but this could be a tool for you to teach your kids or to teach a leader that's up and coming, somebody you see something in, but you're like, hey, I'm kind of noticing maybe in this area, because it's an important area of your life, finance is. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have that under control, that causes a lot of stress in other places. Yeah. But the idea for this one is hopefully for some up and coming leaders who've maybe, school doesn't really teach you how to budget. They teach you other things, but they don't teach you how to practically use your money. The world teaches you how to use your money probably not very well. So we just kind of wanted to bring a very simple concept to you guys, and we hope that it's helpful for you or for somebody you know.
Well, two really easy principles to start with is when you live life, you need to make more money than you spend. Ta-da! Done. So, but when you go back to that concept, you're going, okay, wait, that is so simple, but that is true. So where people get themselves in trouble is they spend more than they make. Mm-hmm. And then you create debt. You're captive to the creditor, the Bible says. Don't be, because if God calls your name to go on a mission trip, to give to missions, to be generous at Christmas and give a toy to a kid, just help the neighbor next door, but you're captive to the creditor because you can't afford to do it, that's a bad place to be, the Bible says, right? So the first principle is make more money than you bring in. The second one is really simple too. Let's tell our money what to do versus let our money tell us what to do. So I like to say, let us tell our time what to do and our money what to do versus let our time and money tell us what to do. Let's be in the front seat of life versus the back seat of life.
So if you've ever said, well, I can't afford that, or I just don't have the money, or I don't have the time, just remember, those are both finite resources. You should know how much money you make, and you should know how much time you have. We all have the same amount of time. It's how we choose to use our time. It's the same thing with our money. You just have to know what the amount is, and now you need to tell it what to do.
So what I find over the years when I do some financial counseling or consulting is that people typically are in a bad spot. Mm-hmm. It's not like, hey, I'm just walking out of college and I'm starting to get my first paycheck and I've never spent money before. That's a great place to
probably
be.
Walking out of college with debt.
But that's probably true too. But what happens is I find people going, well, this budgeting thing's great, but how do I, right? So let's talk about that for a minute, and then I get into the budgeting, and then I'll talk about retirement. So if a person's in a bad spot and you're spending more than you are making, right, then you have one of two things. You either have to decrease the expense, which means you have to quit spending that money. So you're like, well, I got a car payment. Well, can you sell your car and you have $1,000 in equity where go buy a $1,000 car? I mean, I know it's a beater, but hey, get you around. You got no debt, but you eliminated your $200, $300, $400 car payment, right? That's one way to do it. If you have a house payment and you have equity and you want to sell your house and you got enough equity to buy a smaller house, or maybe you need to rent a smaller place. But there's all kinds of ways, whether you make your coffee at home versus buy it at Starbucks, whether you bring your lunch versus buy your lunch. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to decrease expenses. And then you're like, okay, I've done all of that, Greg. So what do I do now? Then you need to increase your income. So if your expenses are still too high, and your income needs to be higher, then you need to get a second job. You need to get an education to get a better job. You need to go ask for a raise. But there's all kinds of things that need to happen. Move back into your mom and dad's house. That's probably not. Hey,
that's an idea.
She's still asking, can I do that and save some money? So she's trying to do that too, right? So not in a bad financial spot, but you're like, hey, how about if I just don't
pay off all the debt and just live with them?
And so no, we're not doing that right now. So, but anyway, all that to say is you want to make sure you make more money than you bring in, okay? And if those are some ways maybe to help get your expenses down, your income up, so you can be in a good situation. Once you're in a good situation, okay, you need to create a budget. And Dave Ramsey will say use envelopes. I think that's a good idea. I think you can use paper cups. So his comment is, hey, listen, go cash your $1,000 paycheck. And then make it cash. I prefer to put it in the bank because I think it's safer, but you can still tell your money what to do if you have it in a bank account or you put it in a paper cup or you put it in an envelope. But he essentially says, here's the money for your housing, here's your money for your gasoline for your car, here's your money for your entertainment, here's your money for your food. And when you're out of that money, you're out. So slow roll it. If you got $100 a week for groceries and you spend $150 this week, the next week you have 50, yay, 50 versus 100, and you're still on track. So you might spend a little more one week, but just remember everything has a cost. And so just tell your money what to do, and when you're done, you're done. Now, overall, what I would say as a Christian, again, got saved at 31 years old, and I did not tithe, and I couldn't believe it really worked. And then the pastor goes, well, you need to tithe. I'm like, what's that? He goes, it's 1/10 of what you make. Obedience, not selective, not a choice. It is, hey, you give back to God 10% and trust that you'll do more with 90% with God in the picture than 100% on your own.
It doesn't make sense. Do you do net or gross?
Gross, because I want a gross blessing, right? You don't want a net blessing, you want a gross blessing. So don't argue with God. He gives it all. So God says, okay, here's your income. And at the beginning of the year, you take 10% of your gross income and you divide it by 12 months, you divide it by 52 weeks. It doesn't matter. God doesn't care how you pay it. But at the end of the year, you need to have paid 10% of your gross income to get the gross blessing, because God says, test me. In Malachi, and see if I don't pour the floodgates of heaven so open you can't contain all the blessing, but you got to tithe to get the blessing. Okay. Then he wants, in the New Testament, a generous giver. So above and beyond the tithe. So then when I went to the church, my pastor who led me to the Lord said, 10% tithe. I'm like, okay. And I said, net or gross? He said, gross blessing. And then about 6 months later, he goes, now we're going to give to missions. And I'm like, oh, instead of tithe? He goes, no, in addition. I'm like, what? Right? And so then we gave to the missions, and God, we never missed a meal. It really works. And then about a year later, he's like, and now we need to do a building project. I said, oh, instead of mission? He goes, no, in addition. So I'm tithing, and I got missions, and I got the building.
He's a banker. Remember, he's coming out of banking.
Does that make sense? Does it compute? And pretty much you just need to go, you know what, I'm not going to write that down on paper. I'm just going to trust that God's true. And it really has worked over all these years, 30 years plus of doing this. And giving well over $1 million. I'll just tell you that. I'll stop there, but just over that, giving it away and going, I'm not missed a beat, right? So God's word is true. So I would say so you get your money, 10% goes to tithe.
And that's what you do at first. He's talking about an order in which you spend your money now.
Right? And then I would say take another 10% and be generous with it. So it could be missions, it could be building, a combination of all that, another 10%. So if you make $50,000 a year, then $5,000, 10% is going to go to tithe. Another 10%, $5,000 is going to go to missions, going to go to building, going to go to outreach, whatever you want to do, right? And then another 10% is going to go into your savings and retirement.
Yes.
So I would take 5%, $2,500, $200 a month. If you want to divide it by 12, put it into savings. Then you need to create some kind of retirement plan on your own or with your employer. Now 30% of your money's gone. So $15,000 is gone. You probably pay $5,000 in taxes. Now you're down to $30,000. Now you have $30,000 to go. I'm going to tell that $30,000 in addition to my 30% what to do. So now that you're going to go, okay, I have $30,000, that's $2,500 a month, right? And I'm going to tell my money $2,500 a month what to do. Here's how much food I've got. Here's how much entertainment I've got. Here's what my insurance is going to cost, right? And that's kind of the budgeting process.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously, again, there's an order to that. So you have to pay for where you live, most likely. So you need to have your rent or your mortgage payment pulled out. You have to know what you spend on groceries. You can't just go willy-nilly to the grocery store. Utilities is part of that. All the things you have to pay to keep yourself alive in a house. All those things.
Yeah, you shouldn't go to the movie first.
No.
So your entertainment, what is left is what you then enjoy your life on. And again, if you are wanting more, you just need to make more, right? But you don't go out and spend more because that's where credit card debt happens. That's where second mortgages, third mortgages happen. That's where you refinance your car and all of a sudden you're like, I owe more than my car's worth. Yeah. My house is maxed out, my credit cards, and that's where people get, I'm in bankrupt, I'm in debt, and you struggle. It's just a struggle, right?
And I know for some young people too, and what you guys, I know everybody likes to go out. I know they like to go and have the experience together, right? You go to those rooms where you destroy things, which sounds like a whole lot of fun. Or you guys go out to the movies, and movies are super expensive now because everybody goes to those ones where you also eat. Or you guys go out to dinner and then you hang out somewhere. Everybody's always wanting to go somewhere and be with a bunch of people. So my suggestion is there's a time for that. But the time might not be this moment in your life where you're trying to build up a base, because you always want to do it based on priorities. Where do you want to be in 10 years? If you want to be paycheck to paycheck, keep doing what you're doing. But I doubt that's what you want to be doing. I think you want to be secure and ready to have a family and be able to go on a vacation and be able to go, you know what, I do want a new TV and I do have the money to do that. So in 10 years, if you want to be able to have a little more disposable income, you might need to say no to going out every single weekend. And maybe just say, hey, why don't you guys come over to my house? Because I guarantee you guys can find all kinds of things to watch on any of those streaming devices. You guys can play games. You can bring over things you're going to throw away and break it. You can do that. Make your own destroy stuff room. But you might just need to substitute a few things in your life now to get where you want to be. Yeah,
it's just priorities. It's where you want to be, like Jill said. And I think, for you, you're self-employed. I've been self-employed. And so that's challenging when you don't have an employer, right? So if you're going to be self-employed, and then you're going to want to make money and put it away because you're not guaranteed a client or a customer tomorrow, right? So you want to make sure rainy day fund, create margin. I think also some of the retirement clever ideas is you can do the traditional 401k or 403b retirement plan. Try to get the employer match. So if the employer is going to get 3%, join, because 3% and 3%, that's 100% return on your investment plus the interest on top of that. So make that non-negotiable. And if your employer doesn't have that, ask them if they would match 2%, 1%, do something like that. But outside of that, there's some interesting ways to do it. So what we did is my mom is very generous. And so when Jill graduated, she bought some stock for Jill as a graduation present. Well, that stock has gone 5 times up in value because Jill hasn't touched it, and that's part of her retirement. Now, for our granddaughter, what we've done, my mom and I, every Christmas, we will give an amount each separately, put it together, and we're buying stock for her. So my granddaughter has
more money in stock than I do.
Has a nice little chunk, and she's 5 years old, and she's probably a pretty wealthy 5-year-old in context, right? I actually had a attorney friend of mine early on. He was young. And I was getting financial advice, and I said, what you should do is you should buy a rental house. He goes, why should I buy a rental house? I said, if you buy a rental house and put it on a 15 or 20-year mortgage, by the time your kids are 20, going to college, you'll have a nice $300,000, $400,000 house you can give them as their first house for their college education. And you'll have, or if you decide to keep it, you'll have a rental stream so you can retire early. He's done that now. I think he's got 3 different rental houses, and we're 20 years past that advice, and he's going, hey, I remember the advice. I loved it. But there's all kinds of creative ways to do that.
And based on where you live, it can be an Airbnb. So if you have the ability to buy another house, it might not have to be a rental property. Airbnb is huge right now, depending on where you live. It could be that as well. So it's not that you're moving into the rental house. It's that you have it so that people can rent it and pay the mortgage for you. And then, like you said, you either have something to give to your kids, they can sell it, and then they have the money.
So be encouraged. The money thing, when you read the Bible, is temporary. That's permanent. Streets of gold. We're going to walk on streets of gold. So gold's so invaluable and nothing. So think about where you walk on the pavement today. You see gum on it and you see trash on it. I mean, that's not going to be heaven, but you're going to have streets of gold, which means we're walking on it. We're not putting it in our pocket. So it's so much better there.
Yeah.
So we want, God wants us to enjoy life here, but the priorities are making sure we make it to heaven and take as many people as we can with us. So doing that, we're going to be honorable to God and obedient in our tithe, and we're going to be generous to help people find Jesus along the way. And then God says we're going to be storing our treasures up in heaven.
Right.
So what you're doing is you're delaying gratification here. So instead of all the things we just talked about, they can be fun. Yes, enjoy that. But if you make that a priority, then you miss out on the great reward in heaven, which God says, come here, good and faithful servant, come get your great reward, which your people's lives are being changed, right? Yeah. So the idea is to be obedient, be generous, tell your money what to do, right? And make sure you always make more than you spend.
Yeah. And that is really just a great way to really live your life, because you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, what do I do next? How do I make it to heaven and take as many people as you can with you? Well, you can't do that if all you're doing is thinking about money and trying to make your money work and just scrambling. So these are really life tips to be able to get us towards that goal. So if you're catching on to anything, it's that you need to have priorities. You might need to write them down because they need to be something that you don't change. Your priorities don't change from day to day. Your goals, your end goals can change for 5, 10 years. Those are moldable, but your priorities of making it to heaven, taking people with you, being a good leader, empowering others, those are things that you do every single day, and that stays in front of you when you have a choice to make.
That's right.
So that's what we're doing here. So we hope you guys really enjoyed this. If you did, make sure you share it, because this could be something that could help somebody. Share it with your kids. Internalize it so that you can share it in your own way so that you really know it.
Subscribe.
Make sure you hit the subscribe button. Turn on those notifications so you don't miss any videos. Hit up becomingresources.com for any other resources that you need. We're here for you. We believe in you. Make sure you're becoming the person that you've been created to be.